I'm going to introduce our panellists in just a second, but we are now going to talk about the role of bookshops and libraries, specifically how bookshops and libraries, looking at them as community spaces and the work that they do in amplifying queer voices and supporting queer writers on their journeys, the importance of that and of community generally, I imagine. And yeah, I'm going to introduce our panellists. In fact, what I'm actually going to do is ask them a question and get them to introduce themselves, such is the nature of my role as moderator. I think you all know me. I'm Jo Flynn. I work for Manchester City of Literature. I'm the comms manager and also producer of our stories today in Manchester. So I'm going to start off by asking all three of you, can you tell us, first of all, your name and the role that you are here in today for this panel, but also I'm really interested to hear a little bit about your journey to that role and what brings you to it. So Abbi, can I start with you?
Yeah, of course. I'm Abbi Parcell. I'm the writer-in-residence at the Portico Library, and we're currently working on a very big project under the name of Queer in the Collection. It's a lot harder than we initially thought with a collection like the Portico's from the 18th century, and it dates well back. We are finding a lot of unearthing a lot of hidden narratives within that collection, which has been really interesting. My journey to where I am now, I grew up in the valleys in South Wales, and opportunities such as this when I was a kid weren't limited, they were non-existent. So I think, moving from a working class mining village to somewhere like Manchester has really opened a lot of doors for me, and it's given me the ability to find my voice as a writer, as an academic, and within the libraries that are present in Manchester.
Great. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Cornford, the owner of Queerlit. Oh crikey, how to follow that? I am a Section 28 baby, as some of you in the room will be. I grew up without being able to see myself at all through school. And as an avid reader at the time, it comes and goes, I just struggled to be able to see myself. So when I wanted to start reading more, and I was going to some very well-known big bookshops that are in Manchester, I was just finding there was a lack of effort, I'll probably use the word effort, in designating literature to LGBTQ plus people. And I remember going into one specific one that is a very, very big bookshop, over 3 stories in the whole of the city block, and being told, we have lots of gay stuff, we don't have it in a section, and if you want, you can find it in its relevant section. I remember the word relevant being really important of that, which meant if I wanted crime or romance or fantasy, I'd have to go and look at a bookcase of 30,000 books and try and work my way through finding things that might say Harry meets or falls in love with James or something like that. And which any of you have picked up the back of a queer book, you'll probably notice it doesn't really say that very often. Like, I think 90% of our books don't say that they're queer within the context of what's on its covers. So I just thought this is crazy, so let's go and fix it. So the kind of idea for Queerlit was started there. We started online with 700 books, which I thought was ridiculous. I thought, that's crazy, and it took me ages to get that collection together. And I think now we've got about 4,500. So yeah, that's us.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Yeah, so hi, Sylvia Culling. I work for Manchester Libraries, specifically at Powerhouse Library, and we're a children's and youth library. And how did I get here? The eternal question. Well, I started in libraries as a library assistant, and one thing led to another, and I kind of ended up managing a library, which is great. And the experience of not finding yourself in books is also something that I share. And then once you start finding yourself in books, it just suddenly becomes this incredible feeling, and I just want other people to have that too. So partly, so I'm maybe jumping ahead, but that's partly what I'm trying to do. at the library and kind of trying to make sure that that doesn't happen to other people as much anymore.
I wonder, Sylvia, if you could tell us specifically about some examples of the work that you do in the library, of which I know there are many. I don't know if how many of you are familiar with the Festival of Libraries that we run every June, but we work really closely with Manchester Libraries in particular. And I've seen some of this great work, but it would be amazing if you could talk a little bit about it.
I will probably, this is a disclaimer, I'll probably forget some of the stuff that we do. So if anyone has been to any of our events and I'm not mentioning them, just shout out. So Festival of Libraries obviously celebrates libraries across the country. Some of the things that we do are drag queen story times. We have performers, we have book displays. So something as bread and butter as that is something that's actually quite important. If we don't show off the stock that we have, the people that are just randomly walking in and looking for something to read might not find it on the shelf because they might not know what they're looking for. We have author readings, we have illustration sessions, we celebrate LGBT History Month every February. And as part of that, we do lots of activities with children. We do badge making, create your own flag, who is your queer icon, any of this kind of stuff that you can do with children where you're basically saying to them, let's celebrate everybody, because we do this for Black History Month, we do it for LGBT History Month, we do it for South Asian Heritage Month. And it just kind of normalizes that kind of difference to children so that when they meet someone or if they realize something about themselves, it's not suddenly this completely alien thing that happens. And they can maybe see themselves as well, even if they're 10 and they don't really know what that means. And yeah. So I've probably forgotten some things.
No, I think you've done a great job of summing that up. Matt, I wonder, same question to you, but I wonder if obviously you do the visibility piece, as you've talked about, that was what was so important for you on starting this journey with Queer Lit, but I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit more about community and maybe onto Social Refuge.
Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know, we've just opened a new bookshop and a coffee space and a bar and event space and no doubt lots of other pits that go under that umbrella of Social Refuge. But we loved having our little 500 square foot bookshop, but it limited us on how much we could engage with our community outside of screaming and shouting just about literature. When we were hosting events or we wanted to engage with wider community, we really struggled to in what was a tiny little space. So we've opened Social Refuge, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the name about that in a moment, I guess. But that's home to 7,000 square feet. So it's a big old unit, but that enables us to have a bigger outreach to be able to support community where places like the Village just doesn't at the moment. So whether that be housing spaces that aren't that aren't alcohol driven, that aren't kind of necessarily loud and boisterous. But yeah, we're becoming home now, I guess, to everything from these style events where we get to have panels and book authors in and poetry events, spoken word. So yeah, I suppose our outreach is starting to drastically change. But there's core things that we do for our community, which I hope never changes. So we talk about, as you were saying then, about having conversations with young children to just normalize that, when you start going to school, not everybody's going to be the same color. Maybe they get dropped off by two mummies or by their grandparent instead, and all these kind of conversations. We have a free books for school program. So I think to date it's over 3,000, but I've just lost count now. But about 3,000 books have been sent to schools all over the UK. And again, these are some of the little outreach pieces. And some of that is driven from the fact of Section 28 for me, that I know how hard it was in school to come to terms with my sexuality and my identity and to have to keep pushing that back. And we want to be able to reassure teens that are questioning or want to question for somebody else that actually it's absolutely normal.
Amazing. Abby, I wonder if you wanted to talk about, obviously it's very different in your library than it might be in the Powerhouse Library, which is specifically for young people, whereas you're at the opposite end where everything is there's much older material.
Everything's ancient in the Portico. I think the Portico's sort of angle that I've been trying to push through is finding lineage within queer stories. So you can see a history for yourself. You can look back and, like, you know, a lot of queer people that I've spoke to and I'm friends with and a part of my family have always said, well, I can never see a future for myself because everything seems so temporary at the moment. And I think we want to explore and show these sort of hidden histories, like how were queer people living their lives like in the past? How were people, you know, navigating things like you're talking about in the past? And, you know, we can learn from that and develop it in the future, but we have to find it and understand it first, because obviously so much of it was so hidden back then. But yeah, I think it's all about the lineage and the history, and it's sort of like seeing that future of yourself by understanding your history.
I was chatting to, you know, Christine Burns.
Yeah.
So Christine Burns is an incredible trans author who wrote Trans Britain, and it goes back probably roughly about 100 years or so. And I remember having a conversation with her, just touching what you were saying then, and she was saying trying to research trans people through history, or just queerness through history, when she was going through and dealing with local councils and things. Different councils and different places in the UK would call things different words. So the Joe Bloggs looking at these documents and these research, you wouldn't know it was anything to do with queer, but the person who was in that office would know this was a gay man, or this was a trans person, or this was a lesbian that had a partner, because they would write these invisible notes into
And it's sort of like trying to decode all of that. It's like a whole process of pulling it apart. And
every office had different words that they would use. Yeah,
that's fascinating. But also feels very Manchester, very kind of, there's an Alan Turing element of that. That kind of code breaking. I kind of love that. I wonder, Abby, if you could give us an example of something that a story that you found maybe through this work that you're doing, kind of unearthing this material.
So the reason I started the project is because I came across this book. It's about, it's such a long title, but it's a French spy from the 1600s and who happened to be a trans woman. And it's her life story, and it's a diary, and it's an original copy. It's a diary, and to the extent where this copy has a letter that you pull out where she's written about like her time of you know, being undercover and, like, you know, doing all these incredible things. And honestly, the book is falling apart. It's like you pick it up with gloves on and you just have to be so careful. But it's just got this beautiful story in there of like resilience, and this story of, you know, it's just absolutely incredible. I urge you all to go to the Portico, ask to see it. I think it's still on display at the moment, but if you go in and ask, the library are really happy to get things like that out for you to have a look at. And yeah, that was probably my favourite story. I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but I remember just sitting there for hours, just flicking through it and pulling out all these like little letters and stuff like this. It's just incredible, like an incredible piece of history.
I know with Manchester Libraries, we did a project last year I wonder if it's the same story, and I also can't quite remember the author's name, annoyingly.
It's like the Chevalier.
Yes, I think it is the same one. But if you go on your way out today, on the very front desk where you signed in this morning, there's some postcards called they're pink, and it says "Find me in the fiction section," and it's actually a decoding postcard basically, and it's a love letter that I think it is Chevalier sent to her lover, queer coded, as we've been talking about. And you can go to Manchester Central Library with the postcard, and you use the clues to find the books on their shelves and fill it in, and you'll create your own love poem. Just a little addition to that note. But Sylvia, I wondered if you would also, do you have an example when you think about the kind of importance of that queer visibility in your library and the support that you give to the queer community specifically? Can you think of a time when maybe that has really hit home, rang true? Maybe an example of a campaign or something that you've run that you've really seen an impact?
So, okay, so there are two things that I would mention. One is somebody gave me a rainbow flag, and it's just there all year round. And for me, it just kind of stays there. And we put it up for LGBT History Month and then just never took it down. So anyone, again, it's coding, right? So anyone coming in and seeing that and knowing what that means will know that it's a safe space, if you want to call it that. I've got some little stickers that are trans flags for those that are looking for those. Again, they're there if you want to see them. And I think that really works because sometimes people will come up and say, oh, that's really nice to see. I feel quite welcome here. Even if they're not necessarily taking a book out, or if they're not even there for a book, they're just there for a space or for a computer, and then you kind of have those conversations. And on the other hand as well, we've got a lot of queer teen fiction. We've made a really conscious effort to increase our queer stock for younger children, kind of primary school age children and teenagers. And quite a lot of the time, you will have 11, 12, 13-year-olds who want to borrow books that maybe their parents don't really want them to read. So then you kind of have that slightly underhand thing that you do when you're in the library, and you just kind of go, oh, okay, yep, you can have that just, there you go. So it's kind of enabling access to those kinds of stories. And some of those conversations that you then have with teenagers or even young people in their early 20s, sometimes you have those conversations, and for me it's like, okay, I'm just going to have to go in the back and be a little sad that you're really struggling in your life, but also that you're coming here and you feel able to have those conversations with us and feel that this is a space where you are seen. And I'm sure you've got the same in the bookshop, where, people come in and they say, oh, reading book X was the first time that XYZ, I felt seen, or, I realized I'm not alone. So if we get that in early enough for children to just realize that whatever their life situation is like, I think that's really helpful to them. And it's all about kind of representation, it matters. And if parents are talking to us, I don't know if you ever have this with your children's collection, but if parents are coming to us in libraries specifically and are unhappy about something, or they're questioning some of the stock choices that we've made, you can always say, well, we're a library for everybody, and at the end of the day, we're the library. You are the parent. If you don't want your child to read a particular book, it's up to you, but we are providing whatever we can to make sure that everybody is happy. And so the same for activities and events. We just try and be as open and inclusive as possible. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
I think it does. I think that's testament to libraries as that safe space. Libraries are not just books, as we know, and as you've talked a little bit about. It is about you meeting people and making sure that the people that need it are getting what they need, that the library can provide, obviously to a point. As I have a young son myself, he's 15 months old, and that, those children's literature in particular gives me so much hope that things will be different for him, because, he has access to to the library spaces, to bookshops like yourself, but also, to that history, I hope, that will come to the fore through work that you're doing. I'm going to shift ever so slightly and ask a question more on the industry, as we've been talking so much about the publishing industry here today. And I'm wondering how the three of you have found the publishing industry. I know, obviously, Abbi, you're a writer, so I'll come to you first, and maybe you could talk a bit about that perspective. But Sylvia and Matt, specifically, about whether you feel your work has had an influence on the publishing industry, and what those kind of conversations from that perspective might be.
I think for me it's been a very long journey to finally getting published this year. I know, first thing. So I think you've got to have thick skin. I think you have to develop, and you have to be able to take knockback after knockback, because and now I've found the past couple of years it's been a lot easier. There are a lot of poetry and prose and all different kinds of presses that do focus themselves on queer work. But then, all the mainstream presses call out for queer work, but it's not as often as, work that isn't specifically about queerness. So that you are limited in a lot of ways. And it doesn't always sit well with me when you feel like, you're ticking a box for someone. You're filling their diversity quota. So that can be difficult to navigate sometimes. But I think it is developing like that sense of self where you know your worth and you don't accept anything less. And, you've just kind of got to push for what you deserve. And you've got to have that sort of inner sort of ability and that strength to say no. If somebody offers you something that isn't what you need or what you want, I think in a lot of ways as well, being neurodivergent, trying to navigate that industry, that adds a whole other layer to it. And it's that whole thing of, am I, not quite knowing if I'm being exploited or not in some instances. It's like, I can't quite tell, I'm unsure. So it's really useful to have, people who understand your work and understand you as a person and who can help you navigate those spaces. Like with the poetry library, I've worked with the Neurodivergent Poets Network, who have been fantastic. We recently did a residency, which you can see in the library. Is it still up? I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. And yeah, it was just a great experience, like to be able to showcase, work on neurodivergence. And for me, it was work on the link between neurodivergence and queerness. And it's just finding those spaces who accept you for who you are and aren't going to try and rip you off, really.
Yeah, we were speaking in, I know lots of you were in creative workshops, but just in case you missed them, in the Rainbow Library discussion group just before this session, we talked a lot about kind of towing that line of rainbow capitalism and kind of speaking to what it is that you're talking about. And I think a lot of that is knowing your publishers through and through and really kind of doing your homework with them. And there are, as Abbi has said, there are hopefully, I believe, lots of places in Manchester where you can have those conversations very safely, who will give you the best information going. Man Met certainly is one of them, Poetry Library specifically, Manchester City of Literature, of course, always, but lots of other organisations too. So yeah, I think that really rings true. Impact on the literature industry, wider publishing industry?
Oh God, I have to deal with so many of them though. I would say when it comes to queerness and publishing, publishers are very risk adverse, and queer writing up until very recently has been very risky. So you've got your typical stories that, the simple romance, the uncomplicated, or you've got the grippy trauma that they love writing around the queer trauma. And the amount of authors that we've spoken to, and in fact, can I say? Maybe. So I was talking to an author recently, only days ago, who said, I've written this incredible book this is the scope of it, this is the theme of it. And he went and pitched it out, and 3 went, we love it. And then 1 offered him literally 30% more money than everyone else and said, but we want to change it to a romance. We want to cut back this part of the trauma, and we need you to do this. He's like, so basically, you've completely changed my book. And that within certain publishers, you will see quite often. So there are some that aren't. You know, you've got Jessica Kingsley, who you've got Andrew James, probably don't think in here, but running around, who was one of the editors there. They're probably one of the most forward. But again, when you talk to people who have worked with them, there is always a thing of we'll take risks, but there's only so much effort we can put behind a risk. We can't throw loads of marketing, loads of people, loads of energy where we're unsure of what the return will be. But it is changing. It really is changing. Queer literature is winning awards after awards after awards. Earlier this year, I can't remember what awards it is, someone may know, but there were 7 awards within one big award piece, and queer literature won 5, and Alice Osman won 2 in that award ceremony. We've got, in the last 6 years, I want to say, 5 Booker Prizes have been LGBTQ plus titles. You know, so it's really, really starting to change how risk adverse they're going to be. There are still risks out there. So you've got, you know, lots of trans writing at the moment. It has to be fluffy. It has to be nice. It can't possibly be the villain. That's starting to change. So we've got companies like Cypher Press out there who are like, oh, it's disgusting. A trans person could be the traitor within the story. We'll take a risk on that. And it's some of the most successful books out there. But again, it's not every publisher that's doing this. So you're starting to see these small indie presses who are going to take a bigger risk than some of the big presses. But then not everybody wants to take their work to a small independent press. They think that they're going to get a huge platform if I go to one of the big, you know, one of the big 4 or 5, and they're going to catapult me into everybody. But sometimes if you're that risky one, they'll publish you and go, there you go, that publishing day is done. Now you go in and go away and do what you want. But authors aren't marketing people. They tend to be able to write really great books, but don't know how to market themselves to a wider audience, or, you know, so it really depends what do you want as a writer going into a marketplace that is risk averse to the content that we want to deliver to them. I don't know if that answered anything there, but that's just some of my thoughts on what we see, because we have lots and lots of conversations with authors, aspiring authors, well-rounded authors that are already out there delivering huge titles, and we get to see just how much effort is going in from the publishers, because we'll have them banging on our door constantly. We want to do an event, you know, do product launch with us, do title launch with us, and front pages, you know, and book titles and all this kind of stuff. And then some people are knocking on the door ourselves going, please, will you help me? They're publishing something, but they're not doing anything in the back end to actually support me bringing my title to shops, you know, to bookshops and to people's eyes.
That's interesting, isn't it? Thinking about it all kind of full circle. I think Mendez said this morning, just speaking about, you know, taking a chance on indie presses and that kind of thing, and whether it even is taking a chance. Mendez said, if I can read my own scrawly handwriting, when someone invites you to step away from what you're still establishing as yourself, walk away. Everything that is by you is your voice, and that's the most important thing. And I would just echo that again here. I think that's what you were saying, you know. If a big publisher is giving you a markup, that might be great. And if you're only in it for the money, then go for it. But if it is about your voice and kind of preserving that story, then maybe there are other publishers out there who are doing, you know, that, as you called it, riskier, but doing that kind of more subversive work. Sylvia, I wonder about your experience with, do you get much kind of time with publishers, or at least influence? Do you think, what's the relationship there between the library and the publishing industry?
So, well, I'm not in the stock team, so I have asked them how all of this works, because obviously I'm on the front end, and it's different for libraries, because Manchester libraries are doing what is called a buyer selection thing, so supplier selection. So the library sends a list to the book suppliers and then gets basically a box full of books back to them. What both the supplier and the stock team think will actually go out as issues. So I would imagine that as a public service, we're even more risk averse. So trying to take a gamble on small presses is harder. So what I would suggest, if anyone here actually has a library card and would like to see the book that they would like to read in the library, is to make a stock suggestion. Because we still, apart from the supplier stuff that we get through, which is, you know, your Booker Prize winners, your bestsellers, some of the stuff that we specifically ask for is actually queer literature. So we might get more of that than you might think. We actually have quite a lot of it. We also have a lot of people of colour fiction, so fiction written by people of colour. It's also one of the things that we go to the publisher and the supplier with and say, give us lots of this. But if there are books that you would like to see in the library, we still buy stuff ourselves if we think that it will get issues. And usually issues means if somebody's asking for it, we will get it because there's at least one person who wants to read this book. And then if there's one person who wants to read it, there's probably also someone else who will read it. So it's again, I'm not in the stock team, but that's generally how it works. So in terms of publishing, I can't really answer that question because I've never spoken to a publisher, but as far as I know, that's kind of how it works. And I have requested books myself, and it's easy, it's nice, and you're also sharing with other people because then it's in the library.
I think Manchester Central Library are quite good with us. They spend lots of money with us.
Yes, yes, they do.
Yeah, every now and again they'll, and I think this is the behaviour of a team rather than a company, if that makes sense. So they've got lots of queer team members because we see them in saying hi lots. But I remember they came down with trolleys, and we filled them up and sent them home with lots more boxes in a taxi.
Yeah.
I think they spent about $4,500 with us, but they came in and went, tell us what people want. Yeah. Because, you know,
and then we got the boxes, and I was really happy because I was opening up all these books and I actually took pictures. There were 2 boxes full of queer teen and children's fiction, and I was just like, oh my god. And guess what? They disappeared from the shelves almost immediately. There is such a demand for this kind of stuff, especially if they're graphic novels, they're teen fiction, if they're picture books. There's a huge demand. We can't keep it on the shelves, essentially. Somebody's asking me and I'm saying, oh yeah, we've got that, but it's out on loan all the time.
Yeah, sorry, just as you're saying that, I'm thinking like, I remember, it's just because of a phrase they actually said to us, but it's so linked in with publishing as general, and I know if I said it to somebody who sat in the room right now, they'd probably nod aggressively. I remember Manchester Library came in and were like, everybody loves Heartstopper, we want more like Heartstopper. And that's probably quite similar to what the publishing industry is saying right now as well, which is, oh my God, Heartstopper did amazing. How do we get the next Heartstopper? But the problem is, Heartstopper is wonderful, and it creates an engagement for queer and non-queer people to start reading queer literature. But oh my God, it's so far from the queer experience in so many ways. It's just a small aspect of queer experience and queer acknowledgement, and the real aspects of struggling with identity, sexuality, coming out, all the trauma that comes with it. So I think, when we talk about how do we challenge back, how do we take risks, how do we do all these things, I think it would scare me if I wrote a book right now and my publisher said to me, is it the next Heartstopper? Is that the feel for what you want? Anyway, sorry, I just suddenly thought that right. As you were talking about.
You don't want to replicate what's already been done. You want it to be your own voice again.
Absolutely, and especially, Heartstopper was a non-owned voice as well, which actually, when we start looking at queer literature, some of the best queer literature I've read is own voice, and there's lots of debate around own voice in queer literature, and you know, women writing gay men, and I mean, very rarely do you see straight men writing queer women, and you know, it actually being published, because I think the publishing industry does a good job of not getting too much of that out. But yeah, don't allow them to take control over that singular voice.
It's interesting, you know, relating to Abby's work, that kind of going back through history and pulling those stories out that maybe haven't been told yet.
Yeah.
There is also an element there.
It's like I'm writing a novel at the moment, based on the research that I'm doing. That's why I'm doing the research, to help inform a piece of autofiction that I'm writing. And I've been talking to my supervisor at, I'm doing it as my PhD. So I've been talking to my supervisor about it, and she's like, God, no one's going to take a risk on a butch lesbian with a load of trauma writing that book. And it's just, I'm listening to what you're saying. It rings so true.
But this is the stuff. I mean, again, it's going to be different because of what we have in the bookshop, but we have people coming in trying to genuinely see themselves in books.
Yeah.
And I think that's a conversation that is really
That's an
difficult to
age-old
get
thing,
over.
isn't it? It's how you.
Of course.
how
How
you
do
can
we
find yourself.
relate? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, general queer literature, and you're going to hate me for saying it, but I engage better with a book when it's queer gay men. And don't get me wrong, I'll read anything, but
You
there's
can
a
see
difference.
yourself in things.
Yeah, and you know, and I love a good rom-com, and when I read a lesbian rom-com, I'll get through it. But when it's a lesbian romance, I can struggle a little bit more. But when it's a gay male romance, I'm stuck to the pages and I get it all. And it's because we want to see ourselves.
Yeah.
So if you've got a butch, dyke, trauma, life, you know, lesbian coming in, actually that's what they want to see sometimes. And it might not be that it's going to hit the biggest masses, but someone will come in and get absolutely blown away by that piece of work and moved by what you've written. And this is where the tough conversation happens on how close to my work do I want to be versus how marketable do we need to make it to hit a mass audience.
It's like, how do you, and then you have to think of all the ethics that come into that, like with the book I'm writing, how do you market trauma? Like, I'm not making my trauma palatable for people. I refuse to do that. But how do you market that?
Oh, well, there's a couple of publishers you can ask easy about that. So I was chatting with Josh Silver recently, and he said to me, his publishers, and he's very open about this, so I know I can say it, his publishers asked him to do like an interview, and you fill this out and we'll turn it into an interview. And then they said to him, that was a fantastic interview. We're going to put it in the back of your book and it will help people to understand you. And he went, no, I don't want that. And they said, we've already sent it to print. Before asking him, can I put your trauma around your drug addiction and getting clean and all these kind of things into the back of your book to help it sell? Before they'd asked him, they'd already sent it to print.
Are we allowed to ask which publisher that was? You can say no.
I don't know the name of the public, because it's
One World.
well, I go One World. It is One World, and actually he's stuck with One World for one of his next books because he said they're great. But again, it was just, how do we market trauma?
And
There's
is
no
that
problem in
whole-
going, if it's going to sell a book, let's get that in.
Sort of I can't speak today. Aestheticization of trauma in a lot of ways. How do you make it appealing? And then that opens whole other avenues of people, reading it in a voyeuristic way, and a whole range of terrible ways.
Can I just jump off from that? Well, not really, but with children's fiction and trauma and queerness, so from what I've seen, children's fiction, obviously we're now thinking of all the bestsellers, and I don't know if anyone here reads children's fiction. Okay, some people, cool. One thing that has struck me is that obviously writing about queerness for children is quite difficult because queerness is
Nuanced, to say the least.
nuanced. Let's go with that. But sometimes, and it's not part of the story, and sometimes it's not the point of the story. So sometimes queerness is just there, almost in the background, And those are the stories that, for me, I really like, because they're not trauma stories. They're not I'm finding myself stories. They're not about bullying. They're not about I'm having a horrible time and I hate everything stories. They're just adventure stories where there happens to be a drag queen, or they're just adventure stories where there happens to be a magical phoenix, where, you know, or you have magical powers, or you are a genderqueer person who is experiencing an adventure story, but it's not about that. I'm really enjoying that, and I think that's becoming more kind of mainstream, if you like. And sometimes you want those stories, you want to have the I'm finding myself stories, and you want to have the I'm coming out stories, and you want to have all of those types of queer joy stories. Yes, so queer trauma and queer joy. And sometimes you just want to have a good old romp on a dragon, and that being fine, and that being, you know, as a, you know, non-binary person, sometimes you just want to go and have a romp on a dragon, and it not be about you and this existential crisis that, you know, accompanies everything. But the other thing I was going to say is that the crossovers between queerness and other aspects of life, so race or class, international stories, so not everything's in Britain, and that's also becoming more prevalent. We see more of them. They're not loads, there's not loads of them out there, but it's starting to come through, and I think that's really important, because we're not just all white queers, you know. There's lots of people who experience a level of queerness who also need to be represented in books. And there's lots of, well, black and brown children who experience queerness who also need to see themselves in books. And that's coming through slowly but surely, and I'm really happy about that. So that was jumping off on.
Yeah,
Someone said earlier today that they believe this is sort of, we're coming into what they termed the golden age for queer literature. And I wonder if that's kind of what you're speaking to, Sylvia, about, you know, we're moving into that stage where it's not necessarily about being queer anymore.
We've got wonderful authors like Adiba Jagada, and I remember interviewing her, and it's interesting. I think she's bucking that trend on trauma that you were talking about, and it's now turning to joy. And I remember talking to her and saying, you know, why, and it was in an interview online, but why do you write what you write? And her response was, I write brown queer girls and I'm not going to stop. And what's interesting, when you look at her stories, you've got Hani Nishu's Guide to Fake Dating, and you've got One Young Muslim Girl, and you've got a Hindi girl. And what she doesn't write is trauma with acceptance from family. So it's not like, oh my God, right, so I've got a South Asian family, and is there going to be difficultness coming out? The grit of the story is somewhere else. And in Hani Nishu, she's got some asshole friends. And you're going all the way through it, and you're like, I don't like them, like, ditch them. And you're kind of raring all that through. But the acceptance from the family is continuously there. It's not any grit about being queer. And that's beautiful queer joy that shows diversity and multifacets, because you've got, like you just said there, like moments from around the world. It's not British, it's not white. I say not British in the sense that she's Irish. So I think wonderful authors are out there writing it, but they're refusing to conform to the typical gay trauma, if that makes sense, of issues with coming out. It could have been so easy for her to write a young brown girl story with an issues with parents. And that's what she refuses to touch.
But then it's about promoting those voices as well. So inviting those authors to come and talk to us, making sure that the books are on the shelf, suggesting them to people, doing readings. You know, I have loads of schools coming to the library, and I read books to them, you know, because they're between 4 and 8, and they love being read to. So what I choose is, you know, there are books sometimes that I'm pretty sure that teachers might not have chosen, that I'm sharing with the children, and usually that works fine, and the kids just love being read to. They don't really care. And it's sometimes you get books like The Proudest Blue. I don't know if you've... So it's a picture book about so the point of view is from a little sister of an older sister who goes to school for the first time in her hijab. So it's like a big day for the older sister, to wear her hijab to school. And she gets bullied in line, and the little sister goes, "Rah, this is terrible that it's happened." But actually, then they have this conversation about it's the proudest blue. You know, this is who we are. We have the support of the family, all of that stuff. So if I read this book to a class of predominantly Muslim children, they get really excited. And it's really lovely to see, because they're looking at the author, because I always make a point of showing them the author, who is a black Muslim wearing a hijab. And I think she was the first Olympic fencer wearing a hijab who won a medal. And then they get really excited because they realize, oh, it's not just a story that somebody has written about us, it's actually one of us.
Linked to a real person.
Yeah.
We are actually coming to time, but I think that is a really lovely place to end, and to kind of reflect back that this conversation, you know, we've talked a lot around a lot of different subjects, but what I'm going to take away from this is libraries and bookshops, as they're doing the work that maybe isn't being done elsewhere for queer readership, and the importance of queer readership at the end of a writing industry. So we've kind of, all the way through today, I feel like we've come from, you know, writers, publishing and all of those things, but now we're looking a little bit more at readership, which is a really interesting direction. I hope you found it interesting, and thank you so much to the three of you for such a lovely, insightful conversation. I will leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.